Hi, I'm Peter Hirshberg, and what I want to talk about today is the role of, we talk about how citizens are such the creative part of this world, and yet traditionally in the creation of cities, that's something that we leave to architects, to designers, and to researchers, and we're entering a world where clearly citizens are participating in ways that they never could before. Witness the last decade of things like the ability of citizens to... Are we ready to go?
Computer signal through.
Oh, you're still working on it. So today I want to talk about citizen participation in the creation of smart cities and a remarkable global experiment that's been going on that we call... Ready? Oh, good. Let's see if this works. Actually, sir, I think you have mirroring turned on. We want to turn mirroring off so I can see something over there. About 3 years ago, so I live in San Francisco, and I've been in the tech sector my whole life. We started an arts organization right at the time when San Francisco was opening up its data. And a remarkable thing happened. Hackers started coming in and visualizing urban data and starting to build apps. And we realized that our creative community and our artistic communities were actually becoming urbanists that were experimenting and using the city as a platform. And the notion of the hackathon, the idea that people could get engaged and build things, which traditionally comes out of the tech sector, started to be applying to the urban world. And the question was, with these kinds of experiments, could these be sustainable and actually lead to really interesting and enduring change in the cities? And that's what I'd like to share with you today. Are we ready? No. Fortunately, I'll keep talking. So, in San Francisco, there was an effort a couple of years ago. We started doing things like, could we instrument our cities? The part of town, the Tenderloin, where we're located, is very noisy, and it was tough to get the city to pay attention. So in a rogue way, we started deploying sensors in the city and building maps based on how noisy is that part of the city. And then suddenly we could go to the police with these, or the city, and they could react on it. In Oakland, when San Francisco, or when the Bay Area opened up data for the first time, kind of open government data, it turned out that citizens noticed from maps that prostitution arrests were happening once a month from north to south on San Pablo Avenue in Oakland. And they thought, you know, the crime doesn't happen that way. Lazy police work happens that way. And so Map and Ham citizens who did these investigations kind of went off to the police and pointed this out, and a feedback loop developed. And we started realizing that this could start impacting cities. Are we ready?
No,
we're not ready.
You're already in a presentation mode. So I've got to come out of it somehow.
What happens if we just turn it on?
It's already on.
Oh, okay, fine.
We've got no control.
Okay. Now, the interesting question when you start getting citizens engaged in building solutions and apps like this is, does the stuff scale? I was at City Hall one day talking to a number of our supervisors and to our elected officials, and I was all excited about the concept of the city as a platform and the data that we were creating. And I realized these guys were looking at me like I was the geek IT guy. It's like, what are you talking about? And I realized I was like the IT guy talking to a business user, and we needed to engage them in some manner of how do we do all this. So a year ago, before the election in San Francisco, we had 11 guys running for mayor. We decided, what if we engaged each mayor candidate in a smart city project, working with teams of developers, nonprofit people, urbanists, and designers, so that the officials could see how technology could help a city, and the technologists who wanted to work with the city could actually work with them together. And that project, which we called the Summer of Smart, was remarkable because suddenly technology and also smart city applications and the idea of civic participation became a campaign issue. More interestingly, it turned out that so many ideas were being generated by our teams and being tweeted out that candidates realized that they could actually use those as points of differentiation in their campaign. One of the candidates, I learned this, by the way, one day, because one candidate was complaining that another candidate kept stealing her ideas. She'd put an idea up on her website, and he'd take it. So we turned our project into ideas worth stealing. If you're familiar with TED, you know those are ideas worth sharing. We realized one way you could take new ideas and make them part of a city is to generate ideas and turn them into what candidates wanted. We ready? This looks awfully close to me. This looks like great progress. Well, okay, now you have lots of other presentations open. Well, this is good. Can we play this?
Should be able to.
How about click that?
There you go.
Oh, very good. All right, so I got to race through the beginning because we're talking about the city as a creative hub here. And DLD is really a celebration of one of the most creative forces on Earth, which is this innovation or startup economy. I mean, it turns out there's, what, 7 billion people on Earth, maybe 4 billion young people, and thanks to the efforts of people like Yossi Vardi and DLD, at least 2 billion of them think they're going to be doing a startup next year. Now that innovation economy, that kind of focus, what if we moved that just 15 degrees over and focused on civic innovation? In fact, innovating to make our cities better places to live. Now that's important because we talk about the city as a platform. Boy, it's amazing when cities give off data, when they have sensors, when you can write to their APIs, this becomes a living object you can do things with. But the question is, if a city is a platform, for whom? Clearly, for great research institutions like MIT. And for our host, Siemens, a great system vendor with a great story that they're telling here, and the ability to go into cities with facilities like the Crystal and do great work. And certainly for artists, architects, and designers. But as Jane Jacobs said 50 years ago, cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they're created by everybody. Now, this would seem impossible. How could everybody get involved in the creation of a city, right? I mean, there's only a limited number of parking spaces, there's only one set of rules for the taxis, so it would seem an impossibility unless you lived through the last decade. Because in the last decade, the impossible idea of everybody writing an encyclopedia happened, and everybody becoming part of the media. You can't write a paper these days without citizens' engagement. So what if it was possible, in fact, for that same energy to show up in cities? Now, we call this movement urban prototyping. And what I want to share with you today is the remarkable work of teams around the world in this space. And urban prototyping is an approach. It's an approach that we have brought to a number of cities. It's basically a month-long engagement with several months of planning where we work with government, academia, nonprofit organizations. We open up new forms of data, and it's about massive urban participation. I mentioned a year ago that during the political race in San Francisco, we created this thing called Summer of Smart. Let me just show you a quick video to show what it was like when a whole city gets involved.
Facebook and Twitter, they have an ecosystem. We're trying to build that same platform for government. Hopefully we're developing an urban operating system.
And we kind of realized there needed to be a dialogue between people out to do interesting things and folks who are running the city.
When you're looking at civic applications, think, what is the one thing you want people to do, and design your application around that.
The answers are not all technology, they're not all about data. Some of them are about marketing and about advocacy and about art and about inspiration. And bringing people from different disciplines together is how we're actually going to solve tough problems in the city.
We have the tools to bring people together in brand new ways.
The very fact that so many people are involved is just an amazing testament to what we're up to, and it's cool that we've got the city looking at it. So let me tell you how we did this. We started with 3 hackathons, so we had about 250 people involved. Each time they spent a full weekend. One of the weekends was about transportation and sustainability. Now, San Francisco is awash in transportation data. You can use an app like this to find the bus. It makes it much easier. But a woman showed up from Muni. She was an intern with the bus system, and she said, you won't believe this, but inside the bus system, the guys that have to keep the buses running, no technology. They have to use walkie-talkies and clipboards to keep track of a bus, for example, if something breaks down. Here's one of the guys here. And she led a field trip from this group of people who showed up for the weekend to a Muni Operations Center. And the ops guy said, yeah, the city says in 5 or 6 years, there'll be technology for this. And over a weekend, they built an iPad app that basically was designed for people who are running Muni. So for example, using the data, if in this location a door breaks down and it gets jammed, how can you facilitate instant information and communications to solve that problem? So this was a case of citizens trying something and deploying something that the city either hadn't gotten around to, couldn't prioritize, but a dialogue began. So this thing got built, and then the paper ran an article on it the week later. It basically said, app designed over a weekend, and basically it talked about the fact that by 2016 the city might have it. Our head of transit wasn't sure if he should be delighted by this because it was innovation, or not delighted because it said he wasn't doing his job. But in any event, this was such a cool app. It was presented to all of the mayor candidates at a debate, and they all kind of embraced it and said, we'd love to do something like this. And Mayor Lee, when he was elected, said, we're going to implement this. And 9 months later, it hadn't been implemented because it turns out, how do you scale something that is completely innovative, but it's not a vendor you're used to working with? This was a new problem with citizens and their smart city. There was an impedance mismatch. The New York Times wrote an investigative piece and said, San Francisco, the leader of innovation, can't adopt it. This fired up basically the Chamber of Commerce that paid for it. And within a month, the thing became deployed, and now this lab of people have become a lab within the city that are beginning to build new innovation. In fact, in the paper last week, Muni's high-tech solutions to delays is actually citizen-led innovation. So we've been working with the city on how do you actually take this form of emergent innovation and systematize it. We had about 500 participants, 10,000 hours. We had kind of all the candidates working with us. It was quite an innovative thing. And here's one of the keys. When you get really diverse talent around the table, something unique happens. Government officials are used to moving slowly. In fact, if you're a bureaucrat and you really understand transit systems, you propose an idea, it's not in the budget cycle, you mostly walk around unhappy that you have ideas, but they'll take years. You join a group of designers, artists, developers, and the goal is in 48 hours come up with a working prototype. You've never seen something like that before. And when you bring that kind of talent around the table, really interesting ideas come up in a city. Now, San Francisco is known for activism, and we're kind of known for creating these movements, but there's a difference. In the 1960s, we were known for protesting the establishment. Today, we get to write to its API. This is not so much a protest movement, but a maker movement. And the point behind this is really, how can change like this be sustainable? The next project in this series was something we called creative currency. Now, in San Francisco, we had some of the greatest innovation in the informal economy. We call it collaborative consumption, the sharing economy, things like Airbnb and Uber. And how do we share all of these resources in our society because now we can? And just under the surface, right next door, we have disadvantaged communities that in fact are in the cashless economy and can't get jobs and don't have credit. And what if we could bring these two things together? So with American Express, we added some new methodology to this. We said, okay, if you're going to bring a bunch of people together that aren't urban experts, you have to do research. So we worked with a whole bunch of city agencies. We wrote a long research paper on kind of what are the problems in our Tenderloin community. Then we brought people together. They brainstormed. About 30 projects were created. We picked 4 to fund over 6 months. And all 4 of those are sustainable moving on. I'll give you an example. Mid-Market's the part of town that we're in. And like any blighted community, there's a chicken-egg problem. We're not going to have restaurants and services there until we have people. The landlords aren't going to invest, but there are no people, and so it continues. One of the project, Square Foot, said, what if we could use the web to drive people to a location and make a platform for landlords that aren't renting out their space to rent out space on a temporary basis, to do pop-ups? And then what if we could employ local people? It was a way of shocking the system into better development and then using that as a model. And here's what they did. So basically, there were pop-up bicycle shops, libraries, coffee stores. The web was announcing that this was going on. We had about 8 times the foot traffic there. And the local real estate interests, including the local hotel that was right there, and the landlords, suddenly began to see what was possible if this was a more lively area. And this is now continuing, and this platform is an open source platform being tried in other cities. This project, Creative Currency, led to 4 solutions. One was a way of building a trust score for people that aren't in the credit system so that they could get jobs or they could eventually get credit. Another was a mechanism for kind of reservations for housing shelters. And of all people, Forbes, the capitalist tool, wrote about this form of innovation. And so as this was going on, we got a call from Singapore. Very different than San Francisco. San Francisco has one of the weakest mayors. We have a very powerful city council and very cacophonous voters. Singapore, one of the world's strongest mayors. But both cities focused on innovation. And Singapore said, could we do what you did in San Francisco here, because we'd like to try some of that bottom-up innovation. And so this summer, Up happened in Singapore. One of the questions was that culture, did that have a culture of civic engagement? Because for many years they've been taught like not to have too many ideas. It turned out it's a very practical society. People thought, well, if we can make a change, let's get involved. So again, about 250 people got involved, but something remarkable happened in Singapore. That economy is really interested in building new private data-driven businesses. When we think about civic innovation, we think about public data, open data portals, and we think about crowdsourced data. Just under the surface is incredible knowledge, the DNAs of our cities that carriers have, information about where all the taxis are. But we're really concerned as a society about privacy implications of all of this. And so, in fact, we don't use this great resource because of what if something went wrong. The EU is famous for this. Singapore basically said, let's write a contract and a set of rules to let people have at this data. And we'll just write rules like if you violate it, the government of Singapore knows about it, and we don't have to tell you what will happen next. But what was great was that basically people could have access to it for a couple of weeks. You had to run it on Amazon Web Services. We opened up something like 38 private data sets, several million records of carrier data, taxi data, energy data. People came from as far as Tokyo to basically start building and designing here. So there was intense interest in things like parking and taxis. The winners of the second prize of the winner of the Kegel Prize, which is a big data prize, came, and they built a predictive analytics app for parking that has now actually been funded. We put an incubator behind this in Singapore so that the winning projects could win. So we made each of the teams make a little video. Here's one of the winners.
We want to introduce you to Hirshberg, the app that tells you where to find available parking. And you know what the cool part is? That you can book a spot when you're nearby.
We created this amazing app during the Up Singapore weekend.
You see, we had access to this amazing dataset provided by Metro Parking, 1 year of real-time availability of parking lots. And you know what we did? We crunched the numbers, build what we call a predictive analytics model.
We can tell you the chances of getting a parking spot at any time of the day, minute by minute, hour by hour. Then, when you're close by, we can book the spot for you, reducing the number of parking lots sitting empty.
At Hirshberg, we guarantee you a spot. No more being late, no more hassle. Hirshberg, parking assured.
Hirshberg, parking assured.
So those guys not only built that app, they're actually building something that does reservations in the parking system. People are obsessed by taxis in Singapore, and 5 teams worked on taxi information, and they realized that 15% of rides were duplicated. That is to say that 15% of the time people are going in the same place, and so apps were built to basically solve that problem and do collaborative consumption around taxis. So we actually left Singapore with 4 companies that are being built, and more importantly, the government got completely excited about this. The Ministry of Health Holdings and the Transportation Department are now all engaging with citizens and using this mechanism. Oh, and something else. At the World City Summit, which is the big top-down conference about all of this stuff, we had an exhibit all about bottom-up innovation, which is really cool because everybody else is like, buy our big system, and we're like, here's what citizens can do, here's how citizen data can work on all this. And it also didn't hurt that the Prime Minister came by and thought that it was pretty cool. So San Francisco and Singapore, the project's now coming back to San Francisco, and this time we're getting physical. So far, every example I've given you has been talking about the data layer of a city. And it's pretty easy to write to an API. There's not a lot of friction. If you actually want to do cool things in a city, affect public space, affect a parklet, go to a pop-up, there's friction, there's permits. And so San Francisco did something remarkable. They said, let's try this again, but this time we're going to watch all the crap that people go through trying to get permits, and we'll pay for the permits. And then what we're going to do is write new laws to simplify it and make getting a permit to actually physically act in the city as easy as an API has been. So this year, the premise is digital and physical, open source and documented, and to be shared with the world. And this is the Urban Prototyping Festival that will be happening this October in San Francisco. Here's one of the cool things. We're working with a developer called 4 Cities Properties that has a very cool part of town that's just beginning to become better. It's where the Chronicle and a lot of the newspapers were. So this is what they call opportunity sites. So they did a catalog of kind of like every free wall and kind of places that aren't utilized. And then we came up with an idea thing. We call them inspirations. Here's what you might be able to do to these. We then ran an open call, selected some people, and here's some of the projects. This is 10 Mile Garden. It turns out that in San Francisco, there's a law that says you can't park in front of a fire hydrant. But the law also says it doesn't have to be paved. So it turns out there's about 10 miles of space that could be turned into little baby parks throughout the city. So the 10-mile garden is to turn the space in front of fire hydrants into this interesting hack of gardens. This one is clip and slide. So if you remember the film Big, where you walk up and down and there's music, we're turning these sidewalks into kind of musical playing devices. This is one of the projects. And all of these are going to be shown in an innovation weekend that's going on in a few weeks. And the developer of this part of town is really interested in what if we just let lots of citizens have ideas of what they might turn it into? Because so often citizen engagement in the planning cycle is in the back end. You know, you present something to the planning commission, there's a hearing, and unless all hell breaks loose, you build it. This is a way of pulling it more up front. This is the darkness map using cell phone cameras at night and GPS light values of how light and dark different parts of town are created and they're sent in. That's interesting for crime. It's also interesting if you want to do kind of light sculptures. So this is just some of the innovation that's going on. Pulse of the city, putting up monitors all over town where you can put your pulse. San Francisco, it'll be pretty clear at the top of the hills. Your pulse will be higher. Now, when you think about it, this pushes thinking in a city. How can you use the city as a canvas? So about a year ago, a bunch of us were thinking, what's the biggest, most audacious thing in the city we could use as a canvas that would be cool? Well, there's only two things in the city that are really, really huge. And this is one of them. That's the Bay Bridge, celebrating its 75th anniversary this year. And Leo Villarreal, a remarkable digital artist who's done a lot of work at Burning Man, got together with Ben Davis, and they thought, what if we turn this into the world's largest digital artwork? Now, because San Francisco has become activated and is beginning to actually think, because we're a pretty conservative city when it comes to public art and public works. Amazingly, this Tuesday we just announced the project is real, and 25,000 LEDs are going up on the Bay Bridge starting in October to open in March, and it's going to be a sculpture that's going to look something like this. So kind of this lovely software kind of setting to it. I think this is going to transform our city. I think that just as people in New York saw the High Line and thought, think of all this cool stuff we can do. We're going to see this, and already people are talking about other parts of town. We have a ballot proposition coming up to take that same blighted part of Mid-Market and turn it into a digital arts and entertainment district where there's visualizations, there's games, all in kind of like giant displays. Now, I was at a press conference just before I came here, and our mayor and our two former mayors were all there excited about it. Here's what Gavin Newsom, former mayor of San Francisco, here's how excited he got when he saw this.
But with all due respect, Paris, eat your heart out. I love the Eiffel Tower, but we got the Bay Bridge. It ain't so bad. And by the way, I was in Paris. I had no idea they lit that thing up, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And then I saw this 1-minute video, Leo. I was like, oh, forget about it. How do we make this thing happen? I picked up on the best of Willie Brown, which is, you know, sort of ask for forgiveness, not permission. And so I learned from Mayor Brown, and I decided, forget permanent art in San Francisco. The key is temporary art. See, then you don't have to, you bypass the whole process, and once you put it in, you never have to take it out. So.
There's a key message here. When you want to try innovation, if there's a planning commission, never call it permanent, call it prototyping, get people involved. And I think spreading this culture and this form of innovation worldwide, just think when Yossi Vardi activates the world's kids to say, go do this, in addition to building all the great startups. So, what's next for UP? When we were doing the project in Singapore, one government became particularly intensely interested in what we were doing, and a dialogue began between ourselves and the UK Digital Society team. And in fact, Dr. Catherine Mulligan from Imperial College came down and participated and realized that there was a real kinship between what was going on and what might be done here. So I'd like to wrap up today and announce the next step in this global process is UP London. UP London is going to be the 19th to 30th of April in Imperial College. It's a partnership of Grey Area Foundation for the Arts, where we founded this, IDEO, who's our global design partner, the Research Councils of UK, and the Digital Society Network. It's going to be a real interesting opportunity to actually start building and modeling businesses around forms of open data here, and also taking what we learned from creative currency and applying them to parts of the economy that need innovation in order to flourish and to move on. And the whole idea behind all of this is to ask the question, how do we scale this? Hackathons can be cute, but when you turn these into incubators, when you provide funding, when you work with nonprofits, when you actually start working with larger system vendors, it turns out that the same exciting innovation economy we witness kind of where everybody wants to be Silicon Valley is possible in cities, and in a very inclusive way. Our goal is to do 7 continents in 3 years. Last year, my colleague Christine Outram and I were doing a project with the UN with teams in Uganda and in Malaysia. And there are innovation people in kind of all of these economies that are in dialogue with each other. And that's the reason that we think this is a really exciting movement. Why? Well, prototypes are great because you're trying ideas out. And so often in cities, you don't try ideas. Governments have to do one thing and get it right. But with a city as a platform, that's possible. And there can be speed. You can try lots of things, fail fast. That never was before possible. Citizen engagement is really participative, and this stuff can scale. And that's why it's a movement, and why we're excited that citizen engagement, I think, will take its place in cities as a creative vehicle every bit as much as it's taken place in media and in brands in the last 10 years. And that social media effect is coming to a town near you. Thank you very much.